I swear I remember the rain the most. Not the kind that dances lightly on rooftops, but the kind that feels like a punishment. Sharp, cold, relentless. I was standing outside this monstrous glass building, the kind with gold-trimmed doors and valets in black suits, holding an envelope in my trembling hands. The paper was soaked. I tried to shield it with my jacket, but the rain didn't care. It bled through everything. The paper, my clothes, my bones. And still, I waited. People walked past me like I didn't exist. One woman in heels looked at me like I was about to rob her. A man in a $5,000 coat stepped around me like I was roadkill. But I wasn't begging. I didn't want food or money. I just wanted someone to deliver this letter, just this one letter. It was addressed to him. You know the type, the kind of man who owns skylines. The kind of man whose last name doesn't even need a first. The kind that lives in headlines, not neighborhoods. He owned the building. Hell, he probably owned the block. And once, a long time ago, we were just two scared kids in the same foster home. But that didn't matter now. A security guard spotted me. Big guy, bald, looked like he bench-pressed pity for sport. He walked toward me with the kind of face that said you shouldn't be here before his mouth even opened. "What's this?" he asked, eyeing the envelope like it was anthrax. "It's for him?" I said quietly, nodding toward the building. "Yeah, and I got a yacht for the Tooth Fairy. Move along." "I'm not asking for anything. Just give it to him, please." He took the letter reluctantly, rolled his eyes, and disappeared into the golden lobby. I stood in the cold, watching through the glass. People inside sipped espresso, laughed into Bluetooth earpieces, and pretended they were gods. Minutes passed. I was drenched to the soul, my shoes squished with every shift of weight. Then I saw him. He came out of the elevator like he owned the air in the room. Designer suit. Perfect hair. The kind of confidence you don't learn, you inherit. He didn't look at me, didn't glance outside. The security guard handed him the letter. He barely even held it in his hand, didn't read it, didn't ask who sent it, didn't hesitate. He looked at the soggy envelope, then straight at the trash can, dropped it in, walked away, just like that. No flicker of memory, no pause, nothing. To him, it was another day, another scam dodged, another nobody dealt with. The guard came back out and smirked. "You can go now." I wanted to scream, to break something, to remind him who I was. But instead, I just nodded. Behind me, I heard the low hum of the trash truck pulling up to the side of the building. It lifted the dumpster, crushed it all together. My letter, my words, my last damn hope. And drove off. I didn't cry. Not there. I just turned and walked into the storm. Because that's what you do when your story doesn't matter to the people who promised it would. You'd be surprised how well a man can hide when no one's looking for him. That night, the same night he threw my letter away without even a glance, he sat in a restaurant that looked like a palace. Tall ceilings and chandeliers that dripped elegance. It was one of those places where you don't come to eat, you come to exist above everyone else. And me? I was his waiter, not on purpose. That's the part that still messes with my head. I wasn't stalking him. I didn't follow him. It was just the shift I was scheduled for. The hotel had a restaurant that served the elite, and I got moved up from kitchen duty because someone else called in sick. I had shaved for the first time in months, worn a tight uniform with a stiff collar. They told me to smile and call everyone sir or ma'am, no matter how they treated me. I was invisible, and yet presentable enough to serve men who never washed their own dishes. And then I saw him. He walked in laughing, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women who looked like magazine covers. He held the door open with the kind of charm you can't fake. He had the air of someone who never second-guessed a single choice in his life. I froze. It had been years, sure. He'd filled out, grown into the kind of man tabloids fawn over. But it was him. The boy I shared everything with once. Food, bruises, secrets. The one I swore I'd always believe in. The one who promised he'd come back for me if he ever got out. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? To him, I was just another face in the service industry. Another body bringing overpriced steak to his gold-plated table. And maybe I wanted it that way. Maybe I couldn't handle it if he did recognize me. Not after the letter, not after the trash. I served his table, listened to him brag about deals, numbers, golf trips, private jets. He was magnetic, I'll give him that. People hung on his words like they were gospel, like money made him holy, and I just stood there nodding. But at one point, he looked up at me. For a second too long. And I don't know if it was something in my eyes or maybe something stirred in the back of his memory. A flicker, a glitch. He furrowed his brow just slightly, then smiled and went back to his conversation. That was the moment I felt it. That invisible thread between us, once thick as rope, had thinned into something I could barely feel. And it was breaking. I dropped off dessert. Chocolate mousse with edible gold flakes. He didn't even touch it. He was too busy talking about expansion, about taking his company global. Meanwhile, my stomach growled from skipping dinner to make rent. One of the other servers leaned over and asked, "You good, man? You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't answer right away. I looked over at him, my old friend, now holding court like a king, and I whispered, "Yeah, just a ghost." I walked away before my hands started shaking. And that night, I sat alone in the staff locker room until everyone else left. No one knew I cried. No one saw me punch the locker door until my knuckles bled. But the thing that hurt the most, it wasn't that he didn't recognize me, it's that I still recognized him. The thing about memories, real ones, is that they don't fade. They bury. They wait. And then, without warning, they surface with a grip so tight it steals your breath. This letter, the one he tossed away without a glance, was never about money. It wasn't about pity or desperation. It was about a promise. One made under a leaking roof between two scared kids who only had each other. I wrote it in the back corner of a shelter using the stub of a pencil I borrowed from the front desk. I wrote it slow, thoughtful. Every word came like a breath I didn't know if I deserved to take. And if you're reading this now, here's what you would have seen. You probably don't remember the night we turned 13. The power went out in the foster home. Mrs. Langston forgot our birthdays. Again. Everyone was asleep or pretending to be. I cried in the dark, thinking about how invisible we were. But you found 2 candles. You stuck them in half a stale muffin you stole from the kitchen. We sat under that broken window and you lit them and said, "Make a wish anyway." I told you I wished for us both to make it out of there. You said, "If one of us does, we pull the other up, no matter what." And then we swore on it. Remember? You used a safety pin and poked our fingers. Said we were blood brothers now. You made me laugh so hard I forgot we were hungry. I never forgot that night. I never forgot you. And I never stopped believing in that promise. I paused when I wrote that. My hands were shaking. My breath fogged the cheap glass window beside me. I could hear the city outside, the sound of money and power and lives I'd never touch. Then I kept writing. I know life took you far. I saw your face on magazine covers. I watched your interviews on the shelter's busted TV, the same one we used to sneak horror movies on when the staff wasn't looking. I saw the way you smiled, the way you talked like you were born on top of the world. And I knew you made it. You made it out. And that made me proud. I didn't write this to ask for anything, not money, not favors. I just needed you to know I'm still here. I still believe in you, but I'm tired, brother, so damn tired. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if you read this, you'd remember who you were, who we were, and that maybe there's still time to pull one of us up. I signed it with my full name. Not the name he might recognize from the past, but the one I reclaimed after the world tossed me away. And I left the letter with every ounce of dignity I had left. But he never read it. He never even touched the part of the envelope where our names met again after so many years. Instead, it was crushed in the back of a garbage truck while he ate filet mignon and talked about market expansion. And the worst part? He probably went to bed that night thinking he dodged a scam, but he didn't. He threw away the only truth left in his life. It started with a whisper. A leak on some obscure news blog about irregularities in his offshore accounts. No one cared at first. Billionaires get accused of things all the time. Money is their shield. Allegations bounce off it like pebbles, but then it snowballed. Regulators opened an investigation. Former partners turned their backs. Shareholders panicked. Reporters started digging. Skeletons began crawling out of closets so fast, even his PR team couldn't bury them fast enough. The press gave it a name, the Gilded Fall. In just 2 weeks, he lost half his wealth on paper. In a month, he lost his reputation. By the end of the quarter, his name had gone from keynote speaker to tabloid punchline. It was like watching a glass god shatter. He denied it all. Held press conferences, claimed innocence, blamed others. But inside, the walls were crumbling. His staff stopped showing up. His friends stopped replying. His phone went silent. Then came the lawsuits. Then the asset freezes. Then the fear. For the first time in years, he didn't walk into buildings in which he was escorted out of them. Reporters chased him. Protesters spat on him. Strangers screamed "thief" at him on sidewalks. And one day, just like that, the glass tower he once ruled locked him out completely. No security badge, no access, no name on the plaque. He tried to smile through it, told himself it was temporary, that he'd bounce back, that kings fall but always rise. But one evening, weeks into the spiral, he walked the streets with no destination, just his coat, his silence, and a gnawing emptiness he couldn't name. He passed a soup kitchen, a line of people wrapped in tattered blankets. They waited for food that barely passed as edible, the same kind he used to waste on his dog. And then he saw him. No disguise this time, no uniform, just the man, the beggar, the ghost from that night at the restaurant. Standing still in the line, hands in pockets, chin low against the cold. He wasn't begging, wasn't even looking around, just existing, quietly, completely, honestly. Their eyes met, and everything in the billionaire's world went silent. He recognized him now, fully, entirely, not just the face but the soul behind it. The boy who once swore they'd never leave each other behind. The beggar didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't smile. He just looked at him, with eyes that weren't angry, just done. And then, without a word, he turned away, walked further into the line, disappeared among the forgotten. And the billionaire? He stood there, frozen in place. Not because of the cold, but because for the first time in his entire life, he understood what it felt like to be absolutely invisible. He hadn't been back in decades. The road to the old orphanage felt longer than he remembered, like the world had stretched it on purpose. The street signs were faded, buildings grayer, the air heavier. Or maybe it was just him. Maybe guilt changed the way things looked. When he pulled up in a rented car, the place was already crumbling. Weeds choked the front steps. Windows were cracked. The wooden door sagged off one hinge. The sign that once read St. Martin's Home for Boys now dangled with only Martin's barely hanging on. He pushed open the door. The smell hit first. Mildew, dust, and something else. Memory. He walked through the hall like a ghost retracing his own footprints, peeling paint, collapsed chairs, the echo of children long gone. Every step deeper into that building stripped away another layer of the man he had become. Not the tycoon, not the boardroom master, just the kid with ripped sneakers and a hopeful heart, clutching a broken pencil and dreaming of something more. He passed the old dining hall. Empty now, he remembered stealing extra bread rolls with a skinny boy who always covered for him when they got caught. That boy had a crooked smile, eyes too wise for his age, and a voice that always whispered, "One day, man, just hold on. One day." That boy was the one he betrayed. He climbed the stair. They creaked like old bones until he reached the room. Their room. The door was gone, ripped clean off. Just a frame now. Inside, the walls were stained and torn. A broken bunk bed still leaned against the wall. And on the far end, etched deep into the peeling plaster, were the letters, J and M blood, not just brothers. He touched it, ran his fingers over it like it might erase the years between them. Flashbacks rushed in. Nights they whispered their plans under thin blankets, the time they fought off bullies together, the night they bled their fingers with a safety pin and swore they'd never leave each other behind. He could still hear the laughter, the fear, the loyalty, the truth of who they were before the world hardened them. And now, one of them was gone, not dead, but unreachable, and the other. He fell to his knees, right there on that dusty floor. No cameras, no reporters, no lawyers, just him. And the sound of a broken man remembering who he used to be. He stayed there for what felt like hours, crying. Not for the wealth he lost, not for the power or the headlines, but for the one person who had always believed in him, even after he had forgotten how to believe in himself. And for the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't grieving a loss. He was grieving a betrayal, his own. He became a man without a map. After the orphanage, he didn't go home. There wasn't a home anymore, not the penthouse they repossessed, not the hotel suites that stopped taking his calls, not the faceless luxury properties frozen by legal orders. He took to the streets, wandering places his polished shoes had never touched, shelters, back alleys, community kitchens where the line stretched around the block before the doors even opened. He started asking questions. "Have you seen him?" He carried a worn photo from years ago, which is the only one he could find. It was grainy from some local paper, taken before the man disappeared into the margins. Some people shrugged, some lied. Some stared too long at the picture, then looked away like it hurt. A few thought they might have seen him. "A guy like that was here once, months ago." Quiet type, didn't ask for much. Real polite, real tired, no names, no addresses, no trail. It was like trying to find a shadow in a city full of them. He started leaving envelopes. He went back to the same street corner, the one where the first letter had been tossed in the trash, and he left his own letter there. Different handwriting, rawer words. It said, "You were right. I forgot who we were. I don't deserve another chance, but if there's still a piece of that promise left, I want to keep it. I want to pull someone else up. I hope you see this. I hope you know I never stopped thinking about that night, about the candles, the broken window, the blood on our fingers. If you're out there and you still remember me, please come back, or at least let me try to be someone worth remembering." He left the letter under a rock, and every night, every single night, he came back to check if it was still there. For days it stayed untouched. He'd sit across the street and wait, hidden behind a bus stop, watching every passerby like they might be him. Hoped someone would pause, glance down, pick it up. No one did. He started doing more. He donated the last of his liquid cash to a struggling shelter. Not for tax write-offs, not for image, just to keep the lights on. He volunteered at food banks quietly. No name tag, no fanfare, just a man in plastic gloves ladling soup with shaking hands. He launched a small foundation under someone else's name, funded outreach for runaway kids and foster teens aging out of the system. Told the lawyer, don't put my name anywhere, just make sure it helps someone who needs a place like we did. But nothing made the silence go away. The world had moved on from him, and the one person who could make him feel human again had disappeared without a trace. Still, every night he returned to the corner, sat there in the cold, watched the wind flutter the edge of the letter, and waited. It was raining again. Not a storm, just a steady, mournful drizzle that turned streetlights into soft halos and soaked the world in grey. The kind of rain that doesn't chase people away. It just makes them disappear quietly into hoods and umbrellas and thoughts they don't want to say out loud. He stood at the same corner. Same cracked sidewalk. Same rusted lamppost. Same rock he used to weigh the envelope down so it wouldn't blow away. But this time, something was different. There was a letter already there. He stopped breathing for a moment. His eyes scanned the scene like he was dreaming, afraid to move in case it vanished. Slowly, he bent down, picked it up with shaking hands. It was dry, new, carefully folded, and on the front, in handwriting he hadn't seen in decades, for him. He stood there in the rain, blinking through the drops that slid down his face. He opened it. There were only a few lines inside. I forgave you long ago. I just wanted to know if you remembered who we were. Keep your promise. Not for me, for the next lost kid. That was it. No signature, no return address, no time or place, just the echo of a bond from a broken past, a bond one man held on to even when the other had forgotten. He stood motionless. Cars passed, pedestrians walked by, the city buzzed around him, and he just stood there. Until finally, his knees gave out, and he sat on the curb, letter clutched in both hands, rain soaking through his clothes, his soul, everything. And for the first time in all those endless nights of searching, he wept. Not because he was found, but because he was forgiven. He looked around, desperate for a glimpse, a shadow, a figure down the street, a face in the crowd. Nothing. The man he had once known was gone. And maybe, this time, he was the ghost. But something changed in him that night. He disappeared from the news shortly after. Reporters stopped writing his name. He sold what was left of his assets, anonymously, and vanished from the financial world altogether. No one noticed at first. But months later, people started whispering about a strange new figure in the city. A man who visited shelters and stayed long after the cameras left. A man who funded scholarships for kids aging out of the foster system, quietly, without ever attaching his name. A man who built halfway homes, literacy programs, free mental health clinics and food banks in neighborhoods the world ignored. A man who never gave interviews, never took credit, but who always left one message behind. One of us made it out, it's time to pull the others up. J and M blood, not just brothers.